Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is I. Yes. It's me, Brennon, here again with another episode of the Too Deep Coverage Podcast. I like that intro. I know it's goofy. I might have to come up with something different, but it's going to work for now as we keep stacking, keep building day upon day, week upon week, trying to make this thing a thing consistently, long term. I'm here at the Bar Branch of the St. Louis Public Library. Shouts out to St. Louis, my home city. We're going to get it in again, talking about football. Just making sure all the levels are cool, got the light cool. You know, the beard is looking okay, looking decent. The taper's cool. The lining is somewhat fresh, week old. We're going to have to work on this joint right here. All of this. I feel like the man that shall not be named, he kind of dipped into the corner there. It was already kind of fading a little bit. It felt like he dipped in right there. We're going to have to work on that. I don't like it. Or not. I really don't care. You know what I mean? I want to make sure I'm fresh somewhat, but not so much that I'm like self-absorbed. It's not that serious. We're not here to talk about that anyway. We're here to talk about ball, right? Still in the off season. This weekend, really this week, but more prominently this weekend is the beginning of training camp. Last week of July. Got a couple updates that I wanted to provide from the spring and just some of the guys that have made the transition from spring ball into the big leagues in the NFL. And then also some upcoming matchups in the NFL season that I thought were noteworthy. So those are going to be some of the things we talk about because, like I said in the last episode, there's no real off season. There's no real off season. And hopefully, if not my content, you found some other content to tide you over until the regular season began, till training camp has started this weekend. And I promise in the next episode, I'm going to touch more on some training camp developments. Nothing really noteworthy yet. There's already been a couple of ACL pops, a hamstring tear. You know, that stuff starts off right away. But nothing real noteworthy yet. Some people are holding out, some people holding in. There's been some new contract developments, but a lot of that stuff is really going to be ramping up in the next week. So I'll touch on that next week. If you want to follow my journey as a podcaster, building, stacking, growing, feel free to like, comment, share this video, subscribe most importantly, so you can keep up with the updates that I provide as I try to be more consistent, give you my perspective and some objective views on what's happening with the league. The UFL. The UFL is a very prominent spring league that's been, I thought, very productive and very entertaining. Not in comparison, but on top of what was already developing with the previous spring leagues. You had the XFL, which was in its third iteration, and then you had the USFL, which was in its second iteration, 2 years in. The XFL started in 2001, folded after a season. They did end up finishing the season, but I think it was financial difficulty or just mismanagement in general as Vince McMahon was trying to figure that out. He was coming over from the WWF at the time, now the WWE, and trying to dip his toe into the spring football water and really wanted to be competition with the NFL. Ultimately didn't pan out. Came back 20 years later in 2022 with the XFL 2.0. And as we all know, the world shut down shortly after that season started. So they made it about halfway through the regular season, 5 games in, and then they had to fold, as many other things did during that time frame. And then XFL 3.0 came in 2023, last year. and had a very successful season, finished the season, but they were in competition with the other spring league at that time, the USFL, who from 2022 to last year was building a lot of momentum. United States Football League. XFL doesn't have a official definition, if you will. It's not an acronym. You would think it's like Extreme Football League, but it's just XFL. USFL, United States Football League, they actually started way back in the 80s. I'll say way back, like, my apologies if that offends anybody. But that was a long time ago, 40 years. Had a very successful run competing against the NFL, grabbed quite a few NFL quality and caliber players, guys that actually came from the NFL or from the NFL draft. They defected to the USFL in protest if they got drafted to the wrong team. I think John Elway and Herschel Walker and it just had a lot of notoriety. Donald Trump owned, I think, the New Jersey Generals, and it was a very successful run, but it was also a brief run. So I think both leagues, the XFL and the new iteration of the USFL, they both realized we're better together. It's not good for us to be competition. We're spreading a lot of quality players thin in terms of roster construction, and we're having our own difficulties with ratings and with finances. Why not just merge, join our finances, join our resources, join our quality of coaches and GMs and ownership, and let's just join everything together and make one solid run at being a consistent long-term spring league, whether it's developmental or becomes competition to the NFL. I don't think it's going to become the latter. I don't think that's the intention. I think it's just to develop some guys and get them ready for the NFL. And I think that's kind of been communicated in the rhetoric from The Rock and Danny Garcia and Daryl Johnston and all the other people involved with that merger. So, as we have it, this spring we had the UFL, the United Football League. I like it. I didn't like the branding necessarily. I don't like just the U in general. It's just it's not my favorite letter of the alphabet as a communication nerd and snob. So it just doesn't look the same as like XFL or even USFL. Is just a little bit more congruent, but I digress. Anyway, UFL season 1, very successful, better ratings than both spring leagues previously. Better attendance at most of the home games. A lot of traveling from fans. As a St. Louisan who went to a few Battlehawks games, I was surprised to see how many fans traveled. I think it was a good season overall. As the season ended, as I mentioned before, the St. Louis Battlehawks lost in the semifinal game to the San Antonio Brahmas. Didn't look good. Brahmas went on to the XFL, to the UFL championship, and they played the Birmingham Stallions, who ended up winning their 3rd straight championship in the spring. Two USFL championships, and then the first ever UFL championship, led by quarterback Adrian Martinez. So what I wanted to talk on mostly in this episode was just some of the additions that were made to NFL rosters, guys that jumped from the UFL this offseason to the NFL thus far. They've gotten signed to training camp, and we know how training camp works. If you've kept up with football any length of time, rosters have to be trimmed down. You know, they start off with about 90 to 100 guys in camp, and they got to trim it down to 53. Well, you don't get that 90 to 100 guys in camp from the end of the previous NFL season, because from the end of the previous NFL season, they're already at 53 players max on the active roster. So you have to start adding guys in the offseason for training camp. We call them camp bodies, unfortunately. NFL players, college players, everybody knows what it is in the football world. You get signed to be a camp body or a camp arm if you're a quarterback, a camp leg if you're a kicker. But the expectation isn't really for you to make the team or to make a real impact. However, if you're a player, it's your opportunity, and you want to do the most with it that you can. So I wanted to highlight 5 guys from the UFL who have gotten their opportunities thus far as recently as this morning. It's July 27th, 2024. The aforementioned Adrian Martinez from the Birmingham Stallions got signed to a training camp deal thus far. We'll see what he does with it, to the New York Jets. Congratulations to him. Never been a real wow kind of guy throwing the football, for lack of a better phrase. He's never been spectacular with his arm. He does have really good power, really good strength throwing the ball down the field, but he's more known for his legs. He's a true running quarterback every sense of the word. There hasn't been much development with his arm as what you would expect from a quarterback who's played at noteworthy universities such as Kansas State and Nebraska. But on the flip side, Kansas State and Nebraska aren't known for developing quarterbacks anyway. Nebraska historically has been a running program, particularly with their quarterbacks, going back to the triple option days. But nevertheless, no noteworthy stats coming out of college, didn't get drafted, but his trajectory synced up perfectly with the merger of the UFL, getting drafted into the Birmingham Stallions organization, who has been putting out some good spring quarterbacks, at least, with Alex Magoo for the first championship run, and then Jamar Chase, I think, for the second championship run. I might be flipping those two. Coach Skip Holtz, I think he coached at SMU in college. He's done a great job at getting the most out of his quarterbacks in that system in Birmingham in the UFL games. And he did the same thing with Adrian Martinez. Adrian Martinez was the MVP of the UFL on the way to winning that championship. He had 10 games that he played, 7 starts with 1,748 yards, 15 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He had 54 rushes in 10 games. So it's pretty good. 528 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. So he was very, very effective running. I don't think there were a lot of called runs. It was mostly scrambles. So he was kind of first progression, second progression, take off and run, but it worked for him. He did end up getting benched in the playoff game leading up to the championship because, again, his arm just was not getting the job done. He was throwing a lot of interceptions, a lot of missed reads. He wasn't playing very well, and he ended up getting replaced by who they thought the starter was going to be, who actually started the season, which was Matt Corral, former Ole Miss standout, who actually got drafted to be the guy for the Carolina Panthers. And as we can see, that ended up not working. They're still trying to find their quarterback post Cam Newton. Matt Corral ended up playing the playoff game when Adrian Martinez got benched, and then Skip Holtz ultimately decided to roll with Martinez in the championship on the way to a third title. Let me see here. So yeah, he's going to be with the Jets. We'll see if he makes it to the final roster to back up Aaron Rodgers. I don't believe that's going to be the case with Tyrod Taylor already in-house, and I don't think they'll carry 3 quarter. Well, they have changed the rule to where you can have the emergency quarterback, so it would be interesting to see if they value Martinez enough to have him as a third emergency QB. I don't know. I don't know. And it's a defensive head coach. I don't know if he's that invested in developing a quarterback, 1, and 2, if that guy would be Adrian Martinez, although it does come with a championship pedigree in spring terms. It carries some weight. We'll see. It's going to be interesting to watch that development. Hakeem Butler from the St. Louis Battlehawks. He went to Iowa State before Brees Hall and Brock Purdy were there. This was 2017, 2018. Ended up breaking the school record in receiving yards for a single season. I think he had, let me see, he had 1,318 yards, 1,318 yards. Very tall, lanky, kind of AJ Green style receiver. Loves to get up the field, contested catches. He's actually a deceivingly good route runner. Doesn't mind fighting for the ball. Looks really good on film. You would think he would have had more opportunities in the NFL by now, but after getting drafted by the Arizona Cardinals in the 4th round, I think it was 2019. Yep, 2019. He ended up breaking his hand, and he missed that entire season, and he never got another opportunity. He bounced around from camp to camp, got signed, got released, got signed, got released. And when the XFL came around in 2023, the third iteration, he joined and ended up catching fire. Had a great season in 23, 51 catches, 599 yards, 8 touchdowns. Was close to leading the league in receiving that year. This season, he ramped up the yards, slightly less receptions. He had 652 yards, 5 touchdowns. But because of the impact and the timing of those catches, doing it in crunch time when the quarterback and when the team actually needed it, it got a lot more notoriety. And he ended up winning Offensive Player of the Year this year in the UFL. And he was first team all UFL. So he ended up getting signed to the Cincinnati Bengals, which I think there is a path there because of his NFL pedigree, having been drafted in the 4th round. That's pretty solid. And having the success that he's had 2 seasons in a row in the spring with limited opportunities, he could compete for a roster spot with the Bengals. T. Higgins is on the fence. He obviously doesn't want to be there. He doesn't feel like they're going to compensate him for what he's produced. They've already lost Tyler Boyd. They did end up drafting Jermaine Burton, but that's a completely different skill set and a different style of receiver, smaller guy, more of a slot, maybe Z type of receiver. Hakeem Butler can be a true X. Now, Jamar Chase is already that, but it wouldn't hurt to have somebody on the cheap that can do the same job to a lesser extent and be some support. Somebody that can step in and be a change of pace or fill in if Jamar Chase misses time or you want to move him around the formation. So I think that could be effective, especially with Joe Burrow back there. You got Zach Moss, who ran pretty well last season for the Colts. Hakeem Butler could have a path to productivity in Cincinnati. So I really like that signing. Who else did we have? Salvatore Canella from the Arlington Renegades, who were the XFL champions in 2023. He didn't really have a significant college career. He did end up going to Auburn, caught some passes from Jarrett Stidham and Bo Nix, but he never produced anything noteworthy to where he would be on the NFL radar. I think he topped out at like 130 yards in a single season. So I don't know. They saw that the talent was there in the USFL. He did end up getting drafted by the New Orleans Breakers in 2022 and ended up parlaying that into a all USFL performance throughout that season. I think he had 40 catches, about 400 yards. For a tight end, that's pretty impressive after not having really any kind of noteworthy performances in college. And then he ends up coming over to the XFL the following season. Was the first tight end drafted. Again, helped them win a championship in the XFL 3.0. And then this season, he led his team in receiving again. So he parlayed that into an opportunity with the Tampa Bay Bucks. And I don't know who their tight end is off the top of my head. Let me look that up real quick. look up the depth chart just to see if it's anybody behind the starter that's noteworthy too. Tampa Bay Buccaneers tight end Cade Otton. I don't think he did much last year, and I don't recognize any of these names behind him. Cole Kieft. And I love being proven wrong, too. So watch him come out and get like 1,000 yards receiving. But Cade Otton was there last season. He had 47 receptions for 455 yards. Very similar stat line to what Sal Cannella produced in the spring ball. Obviously, lesser competition in the spring, but hey, might be very similar to Hakeem Butler and Cincy, a pathway to time. I'm not too familiar with Cannella blocking. I've seen most of his highlights for his receiving prowess, but if he is a consistent, willing blocker along with his receiving ability, definitely has a path to making this roster just from these other names that I'm seeing. Guys that didn't participate in the spring, and I have no clue what they did in college. It matters what you put on tape. Let me say that. The reason I'm passionate about spring ball, obviously, is football. That's number one. But beyond that, you get an opportunity to put stuff on tape. And you want to be fresh in people's minds. These other names, Payne, Durham, Devin Culp, Cole Kieft, I've never heard those names before. I have no familiarity with their film. They're currently on the roster along with Sal Cannella, but I think the upper hand that Cannella has is that he has some film that's fresh, and that's the benefit of spring ball. So we'll see. I'm curious to see how that happens with him too. Him and Butler, I think, have good opportunities to make the roster and maybe contribute. Now, this guy's not only going to make the roster, he's probably going to start. That's Jake Bates for the Detroit Lions. Just recently, I think it was last week, the starting kicker for the Detroit Lions ended up tearing his hamstring, unfortunately, Michael Badgley. And he was the first camp casualty that I was mentioning earlier. It starts off really quick. ACL start going, hamstrings, Achilles. Unfortunately, if guys haven't trained properly or their lower half just isn't prepared for the rigors of training camp, they might have a little too much adrenaline more than they had in the preparation for camp, or imbalances with how they trained, one side more than the other, and those tendons and ligaments and muscles just start to go. So Michael Badgley's out, and Jake Bates was supposed to be the backup kicker for Badgley, but he's now the starter. And he was just a kickoff specialist in college. His trajectory is pretty noteworthy. It's pretty interesting. He was a kickoff specialist in college, so he didn't kick any field goals. He went to Texas State and Central Arkansas. You know, thing about kickers is a kicker is a kicker is a kicker. So it's not like you're going directly one-on-one against another man. It's you versus the goalpost. So the benefit for him was that he didn't have to I just got some random person behind me. He didn't have to worry too much about the level of competition as some other players would. Like, oh, I have to play in a Power 5 conference or D1 FBS. He didn't have to worry about that. He just has to kick the ball. So schools don't really matter. But when he got his opportunity in the UFL this season, he played for the Michigan Panthers, who came over from the USFL. His first ever field goal that was recorded, college or professional, was this past season, and it was the longest ever field goal in spring football history. I think that's a pretty good start. 64-yard game-winning field goal. 64 yards against the St. Louis Battlehawks, unfortunately. It was week 1 of the regular season, and that was the second longest recorded field goal ever. Justin Tucker just hit one for 66 yards last season or 2 years ago. 66. And ironically, both of those field goals, Justin Tucker's and this guy, Jake Bates, were at Ford Field in Detroit. So go figure. Maybe that's just a great place to kick. Bates ended up making 2 other 60-yarders, and ultimately by season end went 17 for 22. Pretty good percentage. Impressive enough for him to get an opportunity for the Lions for camp, and now he's in line to start. So we've already seen a kicker make his way from spring ball to the NFL and have really good success in Brandon Aubrey, who's currently starting for the Dallas Cowboys. He was kicking for the Birmingham Stallions in 2023, and he's like on an all-pro level now as a kicker. So Jake Bates, again, a pathway to success in the NFL coming from spring ball. This is why spring ball is important. You finding those gems, those diamonds in the rough. And finally, the last guy I wanted to mention was Justin Hall, going from the Houston Roughnecks to the Miami Dolphins. He got signed to the Dolphins last week. He ended up going to Ball State. I believe he played at another university. I didn't find that information, but he reminds me of a Dante Hall, not just in name, stature, style of play, just the shiftiness, the ability to change direction quickly, accelerate, get up the field. He played, again, for the Roughnecks, had 56 catches for 603 yards. So I mentioned Hakeem Butler earlier and his receiving prowess, how he got Offensive Player of the Year. This was his main competition last season overall. Third in the league in receiving, 3 touchdowns. He also had 148 yards returning, which was 4th in the league. So he's a versatile receiver, also kind of like Tyreek Hill, not in the sense of his explosiveness, but just that versatility. He's a game breaker with the ball in his hands, and he can get up the field. 783 all-purpose yards, which had to be, if not leading the league in the UFL, close to the tops. So that versatility got him the opportunity with the Dolphins. You can already see, as I mentioned, Tyreek, the type of receivers that Mike McDaniels likes. It's just going to be helpful for him to have another body that can simulate that kind of play and potentially fill in if necessary. I think they are loaded at receiver, so it's going to be a hard pathway for Justin Hall to make the roster. But I still think it's a fair shot for him to get some opportunities in camp and add to his film and his productivity. You also, I just had some other names I wanted to mention. Brandon Aubrey, again, guys that made it from spring ball to the NFL and had some noteworthy success. Kevontae Turpin, also for the Cowboys. He played for who was that he played for in the USFL? Was it the Stallions? I think he played for the Stallions as well. But we can see as soon as he got to training camp last year, he was making an impact in the preseason, returning punts and kicks for touchdowns. And he ended up making a roster and being a solid returner. Now, it's going to be interesting to see with this new kickoff rule just how productive he and many other returners can be in the return game. Now that kickers aren't just kicking the ball through the back of the end zone, they have to kick it in a certain space to provide an opportunity for a return. That makes someone like Kevontae Turpin or Justin Hall that much more valuable. And then finally, the most noteworthy spring football player to get opportunity in the NFL probably is He Hate Me. Back in the XFL days, Rod Smart, he ended up playing for the Carolina Panthers in the Super Bowl, being a returner and a backup running back whose nickname was just synonymous with the XFL and with spring ball in general. So, I can't forget about Tommy Maddox, who also played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, had a really good run after winning that first XFL championship. So that list can go on and on. I didn't want to really get stuck there, but just wanted to touch on a couple of those guys. And there's plenty of other guys that have been signed too. I think there's a lineman that the Bengals signed, an offensive lineman that was really good. A couple of cornerbacks have gotten signed. The list is going to continue. Garyon Conley, who ended up flaming out for the Houston Texans. Not the Texans. Who did he get drafted by? Was it the Raiders? It was the Raiders. And then he flamed out, came to the UFL this season. Now he just signed with the Texans. So, yeah, it's going to be a good opportunity in the future for guys who don't get drafted or who don't make the final roster in the NFL to get their feet wet. I believe as the UFL gets its footing and its foundation in the coming seasons, more guys are going to trust it as a developmental league, and the level of competition and the quality is going to go up, and it's going to be its own league. It's going to be good in its own right, but it's also going to be a good springboard, kind of like what you have in other sports leagues. All right, I wanted to touch on the schedule as well for the upcoming season. I believe there's so many interesting and scintillating and appetizing matchups that we need to be on the lookout for. And it starts off with opening night, week 1. The NFL kickoff game between the Ravens and the Chiefs. I was really big on the Ravens last season. I was really big on Lamar Jackson last season. Historically, I've been one of his more staunch critics. I knew what he did at Louisville, passing the ball, throwing the ball. I knew what he was capable of, but I hadn't seen that in the NFL. I hadn't seen that translation with consistency. I saw bits and pieces, but the way that he was getting hyped up, and I think it's just my anti-personality as well, always going the opposite way of everyone else. But the way he was getting hyped up and celebrated for his accomplishments early in his career, outside of him throwing the ball, it just didn't sit well with me. And it wasn't because I didn't like Lamar Jackson. It was primarily because it wasn't leading to much success with this team. We all know that in order to win championships, you've got to be able to throw the football. You can't just win as a running quarterback. It hasn't worked in this league in 60 years. It's not going to start working now. And accordingly, in the coming seasons, Lamar started to progress year after year. His throwing got better and better, more and more accurate, more and more on time, in phase, not having to leave the pocket, giving himself the option of staying in the pocket as well as escaping, as opposed to having to throw on the run or just take off running. So it was encouraging to see that progress to the point that last season I thought he was going for 5,000. But not 5,000 just throwing. I thought he would get 4,000 passing and 1,000 rushing. I was fully ready to see that kind of season. 35 total touchdowns or more. I thought he was going to have a Cam Newton 2015 type of year. And I picked the Ravens to win the Super Bowl. I thought that the Chiefs were vulnerable with the losses that they experienced on the offensive side of the ball, talent-wise. And I thought the Ravens had just gotten that much better. And it looked that way for much of the season. The Ravens ended up beating the 49ers in like week 5 or something like that when the 49ers were undefeated. And they had a lot of big wins headed towards the playoffs that reinforced my belief. Yeah, Lamar is playing like that. And then he started to stumble. You know, the numbers weren't quite reaching my expectations, which gave me some pause. And there were some games that they should have won or could have won if he had been a little bit more consistent with ball placement. And if he had gotten some more support from his receivers as well, to be fair. But nevertheless, they get to the playoffs, and they were in position to do the thing, playing against the Chiefs, and they just decided to abandon completely abandoned the formula that had gotten them there. And I think that's why there's a different offensive coordinator in place. Well, Monken was there last year, but he may not be there much longer if they don't get past where they got last season, because he's replicating the same issues that they had with Greg Roman of play calling. You run the ball all season successfully. You get to the playoffs from running the ball, planned runs with Lamar Jackson, and then you decide to throw the ball 40, 45 times. It didn't add up. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. So, not putting that on Lamar, but new season, new opportunity. I'm not as high on the Ravens as I was last year because I don't know how much more Lamar can do. He is getting Mark Andrews back healthy, which would be a plus, and they did draft a receiver in Devontae Walker from North Carolina. But I just don't know if I have as much confidence in them this year from last year, especially with the Chiefs now coming off of a second straight Super Bowl in their third in 4 years. It's going to be completely different. Different energy, different chemistry. Not saying it can't happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Chiefs do a three-peat. Combination of the coaching staff with Andy Reid. I was an Eagles fan when Andy was there. And I'll touch on that probably next episode, just my fanhood journey with all of these different teams that I've been on a bandwagon for. You've got the best quarterback in football in Patrick Mahomes. And you have one of the sneaky best defenses in the NFL. Top 5 defense with Nick Bolton and Chris Jones and Trent McDuffie. There's no reason why they shouldn't win a third straight Super Bowl. I don't see it in the division, and that's as a Raiders fan. And I don't really see it in the conference. The Bills didn't get better, and the Ravens didn't get significantly better outside of Derrick Henry, which we'll see how that actually works. Sometimes things look great on paper, and then when it's time to deliver, it's different. So that'll be an interesting opening night game, though. I know the Ravens will have some bad blood and some unfinished business. They want to prove a point. Even though the Lions ultimately didn't win the Super Bowl last year, they made a statement in the NFL kickoff game last year against the Chiefs by beating them handily in all 3 phases. So it could just be a great way to start the year for the Ravens, try to get some momentum going. But if they come out flat in this game, they'll be fighting uphill the rest of the year, which won't work well for them. Another week 1 matchup I was interested in, Steelers versus Falcons. That'll be Russell Wilson, supposedly, starting against Kirk Cousins, 2 grizzled veterans from different franchises for long periods of time, joining new franchises and trying to prove that they still got it and that they're still worthy of being starters in the NFL. And Atlanta was supposed to be a landing spot by a lot of insiders for both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, who's backing Russ up in Pittsburgh. So it'll just be an interesting dynamic. I wish that was a night game, but the Monday night game is going to be the one. That's the Jets 49ers. Aaron Rodgers coming off of the Achilles tear. The 49ers coming off of another Super Bowl hangover, a long offseason from a Super Bowl loss that should have been and could have been a Super Bowl win. They have 2 of those now against the Chiefs in the past 5 years. Very, very interesting AFC-NFC clash. I'm big on Aaron Rodgers this year. I haven't been the biggest fan of his personal contributions in the media and social media, but what he does on the field is unquestioned. He's one of the best quarterbacks of all time. He is probably the best quarterback talent of all time, with Patrick Mahomes easily in that conversation. and he'll be healthy. He'll have an assortment of weapons. He'll have a great running game behind Breece Hall, and he'll have probably the best defense in the NFL, where he doesn't have to be Superman. All he has to do is get his team a lead, maybe 2 scores, and let the defense handle the rest, and the running game handle the rest. So this will be a great way to test just where they are and just how good of a formula that can be for them and how successful that can be long term, meaning the next 2 years. The rest of this season into next season, because he's committed to playing 2 seasons. He says he wants to play of great football, healthy. Week 2, you got Steelers Broncos. That'll be a revenge game for Russ, trying to stick it to Sean Payton. I'm curious to see what Payton does with the quarterback battle over in Denver, if he's going to go with Bo Nix, Jarrett Stidham, Zach Wilson. He's got 3 interesting options. One is obviously younger and more heralded coming out of college, fresher. So he'll probably get, I believe he'll get the first nip at that bud. But we might have to pump the brakes on him being the next Drew Brees, especially if that's what Peyton is thinking. I don't quite see that, especially being a 6-year starter in college. You got Bengals Chiefs. That'll be a good matchup as well. Burrow coming off of his ACL. And then you got the last team to beat the Chiefs in the playoffs as well. So that'll be a good matchup. Bears Texans. I like that because of the 2 young quarterbacks, C.J. Stroud in year 2, Caleb Williams supposedly in his second start if all goes well. I think that'll be a good measure of the future of the league at quarterback in those 2 matchups. Week 3, you got Chiefs Falcons. I personally like that one. I just think that'll be a sneaky good matchup. You got Jags Bills. Trevor Lawrence coming off of a really down season where he had some continuity at OC and at head coach. He had a healthy Calvin Ridley coming off of suspension, getting the rust off. He had Christian Kirk, Zay Jones. He had Travis Etienne. He had everything that you should ask for from a quarterback. And he didn't really live up to the expectations for anyone. I'm sure himself included. Yet, he still was able to get a contract in the offseason, get an extension, more than what I expected and probably what he deserved. But I can't be an owner yet. I'm also not a GM, so I'm sure they're banking on potential as opposed to using the evidence of what's already occurred to make their decision. I guess they just assume it's just going to get better just because he's too talented and he was too good in college. It's just no way that it's not going to get better. But this is a show improved league, man. He's had a playoff win and nothing else before or after to speak of. And he's had plenty of support. So that extension kind of threw me off. It's going to be I just want to see if he's going to ascend into that elite territory or if he's going to remain a mid quarterback, a tier 2, tier 3 guy. Especially losing Calvin Ridley in the offseason. Now they've got Brian Thomas over there, a rookie from LSU, pretty explosive. Definitely help him stretch the field more. Not that Calvin Ridley couldn't do that, but Brian Thomas, that's his calling card. The defense is going to get much, much better with Josh Hines Allen. That's going to be an adjustment to say that since he changed his name. Trayvon Walker. They've got some dogs over there. They gave, what's that corner's name? Tyson Campbell an extension to support that secondary. So them going up against the Bills with the original Josh Allen, because Josh Hines Allen came in after. Josh Allen, the quarterback, losing a lot of his supporting cast with Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis leaving, and now having Keon Coleman and company. They plan on using Curtis Samuel pretty interestingly as kind of a Debo Samuel kind of guy, playing jet sweeps and a little bit of running back, lining them up all over the formation. But not much else to speak of. Khalil Shakir, we don't know how that's going to go. That's going to be a good gauge of if the tide actually changes in the AFC as far as who the powers are, or if they stay the same. If Josh Allen can really be the man without the help, not that he leaned that heavy on Stephon Diggs last year, let's be clear. He made sure to spread the ball around and be as effective as he could be without being dependent on one guy. But at least you had that guy on the field to dictate coverage and kind of determine how you move through your progressions. I believe Keon Coleman can be the number one guy. I'm a Florida State guy, so I watched all of his games. Full support, full confidence in him, even removing the bias. I mean, the proof is in the tape. But NFL, different beast. So that'll be a good matchup. And then I like Commanders-Bengals. Joe Burrow, as I mentioned before, with T and Jamar. They got Zach Moss in there, going up against the rookie and Jaden Daniels. Old LSU versus new LSU, even though Joe Burrow's not that old. Just seeing how the Commanders have progressed through the preseason and early in the regular season to that point, and being on Monday Night Football is just going to be a good gauge of how ready he is and how good he is that early in his career. If he's going to have more of a Bryce Young trajectory in year one or a CJ Stroud trajectory in year one. And they'll be able to gauge that against one of the best quarterbacks in the league, probably a top 5 guy if he stays healthy. And we can go on and on. We got Bills, Ravens, week 4. I say that's the battle of the AFC team, best AFC team not named the Chiefs. The Jags versus the Texans, they got that twice a year. Week 5, you got Ravens, Bengals. I think that'll be a good one. Bills, Texans. Any kind of mix of the top AFC teams should be good TV, good theater. Packers, Rams in week 5. I think that'll be a sneaky good one. Jordan Love just getting that contract extension, just turning that hand over the top of Tua with $5 million extra dollars on his deal than what Tua got. Having an assortment of talent at receiver with Christian Watson coming back healthy. They figured out what his imbalance issues were with his hamstring. Romeo Doubs, Dontavius Wicks. These names, boy. What's the other guy's name? Jaden Reed. Forgive me. Luke Musgrave. He's got all the talent. They added Josh Jacobs. I think they'll be back in the driver's seat in the NFC North, if I'm being honest. I like what the Lions have done and what they're doing. I don't like it more than what I liked in the Packers. I really thought the Packers would win the division last year. I'm not sure what it was that caused them to stumble. If I'm being completely honest, the beginning of last year, before the Achilles tear, I thought the Vikings would win the division. And I think they were on their way until Kirk got hurt. I think that team was primed to push for a Super Bowl berth. Not saying they were going, but I thought they could have got to the NFC Championship game very easily. Kirk gets hurt. Jordan Love finds his flow. And then I was on that bandwagon until, I don't know, the Lions got hotter, but I still think the Packers left a lot on the field, a lot to be desired. They got a solid defense. The Rams, on the other hand, they're still in a Super Bowl window with Matt Stafford. They already won one. They've made several more pushes with all the turnover that they've had. This will be their first time without Aaron Donald on the field in Sean McVay's tenure. So figuring that out on the defensive side will be interesting. But a lot of young talent that they've gotten through the draft on that defensive side. Cooper Kupp is coming back completely healthy to go alongside Puka Nacua. So they got a 1-2 punch at receiver. They got a 1-2 punch at running back by getting Blake Corum to be behind Kyron Williams. I think that could be a really, really good Week 5 matchup. Week 6, Commanders, Ravens. I like that one just because of the dynamic between Lamar and Jaden Daniels. Both of them very comfortable running. Jaden a little bit more comfortable throwing the ball, but Lamar's definitely come along. Shout out to black quarterbacks, too, if I'm being completely honest. I just want to see that continue to thrive. Those quarterbacks continue to thrive at a high level. Bills, Jets twice a year. I think that'll be good between Aaron Rodgers and Josh Allen, very similarly. Theater from the quarterback position. Let me see. Broncos, Saints in Week 7. We already know what that is, with Sean Payton going back to New Orleans. Texans, Packers, Stroud versus Jordan Love. I like Bears, Commanders, Week 8. Number 1 versus number 2 overall picks in the 2024 draft between Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. Eagles, Bengals will be pretty good. At this point in the season in Week 8, are the Eagles going to be where they were last season? Will they be able to exceed the win total of last year, where they began to collapse like Week 10? Are they going to continue to ascend, or are they going to have a repeat of what happened last season? Or, with the NFC East being wide open, will they be undefeated? The Cowboys didn't get much better. They didn't really sign or add anybody of note. The Giants clearly lost their best player, even though they added a great piece on defense with Brian Burns. And then the Commanders, they added some pieces, but it's a whole lot of turnover. Great quarterback coming out of college. You add a great aging veteran at linebacker on defense. And the defense was already pretty competitive last year. Now you get a defensive-minded head coach. But you're still working uphill against a team that's been together. Coach has been there. The quarterback's been there. Receiver's been there. A lot of the defense has been there. And their defense got much better through the draft and the offseason by adding Hassan Reddick if they can get him signed. So they could go either way. The Eagles could go either way. They could be undefeated, or they could be under 500 by Week 8. And then, obviously, the Bengals spoke on them earlier. Are they going to be able to sustain a run game to where, and protection with their offensive line to where Joe Burrow can stay upright and not be hit the most in the NFL at quarterback? Texans, Jets, Week 9. Stroud versus Aaron Rodgers. I like that one. Bears, Cardinals. That has historically been a sneaky good matchup. I remember one year the Bears played the Cardinals in Mexico City. I think it was Matt Leinart against, I forget who the Bears had out. Was it Jay Cutler? I don't know if that was like Brandon Marshall, who was on that Bears team. But that was a really good game. I think it went to like overtime or something like that. They've had some really good games, even when their teams haven't necessarily been really good. Now you've got Kyler Murray back healthy with a new toy in Marvin Harrison Jr. And you also have James Conner giving you a bunch of touchdowns. You got Budda Baker over there on defense. And you've got a defensive-minded head coach to help support the offense that's already there. And then the Bears have an assortment of riches at wide receiver. And on the defensive side, they've added some solid pieces. Montez Sweat last year to boost their trajectory from being in the basement to now being a top 10 defense. So I think that'll be a good matchup too. It'll be interesting to see how they are in their divisions respectively, the NFC North and the NFC West by that time in the season, and if they'll still be competitive for division championships or playoff berths or beyond in the NFC. Bucks, Chiefs. I like the Bucks versus the Chiefs because I think the Bucks were just finding their footing last year in the NFC South with Baker Mayfield. Now you have another year of continuity. Obviously, Baker lost his offensive coordinator to the Panthers and Dave Canales, who's kind of made himself out to be a quarterback whisperer in helping out Geno Smith in Seattle and then Baker in Tampa. And now he's going to work with Bryce Young. So I think that'll definitely be a big loss for Baker, but he's had so much turnover throughout his career. It was really just a matter of him staying healthy and having some level of continuity and belief, because the power of belief is really big. If you've got a coach and an organization that believe in you, I think that can work wonders, and I think that's what it's done for his career, coming from Cleveland and then Carolina and the Rams. Now he's settled in. He's got his deal. He's got his weapons. I think that'll be I think that's an upset alert for the Chiefs. By this point in the season, they've probably gotten into their flow or their rhythm, and they might be overlooking the Bucs, especially if the Bucs don't come in like 6-2, 7-1, or a powerful record like that. If they're hanging out closer to 500, that could be a game where the Bucs sneak up on the Chiefs and catch them slipping. Week 10, I highlighted Bengals-Ravens. I think that'll be a good interdivision matchup twice this season. Lions-Texans. I think that'll be a good one as well. Dolphins-Rams. I haven't really been high on the Dolphins. I'm not the biggest believer in Tua, but I can't deny what they've got over there. You've got one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the league. It's not arguable. You've got the most dynamic receiver in the league to go with one of the other fastest receivers in the league as a duo. And now you've got 4 running backs that you can choose from. You've improved the defense. There's not much that could be said beyond that. There's not much that could be denied, rather. Dolphins versus Rams on Monday Night Football. That could be a potential top 5 matchup of teams, like 2 top 5 teams, or top 5 games of the year, either one, because both teams have that good of potential, and their divisions are kind of leave a lot to be desired. Let me see. Thursday Night Football, Week 11, Commanders versus Eagles. Depends on how Jaden is supported, or if he is able to lift the Commanders with his ability and his talent. That could be a good head-to-head matchup twice this season. Jags versus Lions. Is Trevor Lawrence keeping them competitive by this point in the season? Are the Lions able to replicate or build upon what they've done the past 2 seasons at this point in the year? Side note, I haven't mentioned the Vikings yet, but the reason I keep questioning the Lions is because, along with Jordan Love and the Packers, along with what the Bears could be if Caleb Williams is 20% of what his potential is long term with all the support he has, the Vikings, I think people sleep on how good the Vikings actually were last year. If you look at their finish, I think they went 7-10, I believe. I can't remember their record. But they did all that without the way they finished the season was without Kirk Cousins. They have a lot of talent over there in Minnesota. They didn't have a running back. Cam Akers came over there. He got hurt immediately. Alexander Madison, I said before the season started, he wasn't that guy. The film proved that true. But the defense was balling. Brian Flores had that defense on fire. Justin Jefferson is Justin Jefferson. Nothing else needs to be said. Jordan Addison came in and proved he could very easily be a true number 1 for that roster or any other roster in the league. If it came, that responsibility was hoisted upon him. In Justin Jefferson's absence, he proved that. So you basically have 2 number 1 receivers. You have one of the best tight ends in the league in T.J. Hockenson, who also had got hurt. Now they've got all of that stuff back. The only question mark is quarterback. They drafted J.J. McCarthy, but and this is ultimately what I was getting at. Sam Darnold was still a, a top 3 pick in the NFL draft. That means something. He's still in the league. That means something. He was entrusted to be the starting quarterback for an NFL franchise in 2024, despite what's occurred in his past. That means something. You have a quarterback, a former NFL quarterback, who's the head coach that wanted Sam Darnold to be the starter ahead of J.J. McCarthy while McCarthy gets his feet right. All of that means something. There's something there. The team is there already, and then you put Sam Darnold at the helm of that team. That's not something to brush off. So for me personally, I think Darnold could really be a candidate for comeback player of the year. If they lean on the run game with Aaron Jones, Ty Chandler, he trusts his tight end, and if you need to get out of situations, hit him on the flare route or the curls or the comeback routes, crossers, hit your running backs out the backfield. And then when you do have the appropriate protection and you have the good rhythm, start picking the defenses apart with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison down the field. I think Darnold can do that. And I think he's going to have much better protection than he ever had in New York, and then that he's had when he was in Carolina briefly. I think he's in the best situation of his career. I think the talent's there. I think his confidence is going to be up. And the Vikings could be a sneaky, sneaky team, not just in the NFC North, but in the NFC in general. Not Sam Darnold himself, but the team. I think he would be able to find a good role for that team. And then he very well could just be completely trash as well. I don't know. But that's going to be something to watch. That's why I say I don't think it's a lock the Lions just win the NFC North this season. That's going to be a very competitive division, in my opinion. I think it's going to be like the NFC North of old, where it could go either, or the NFC East of old, the recent 15, 20 years, where there was a different division winner every year. I think the NFC North is in that place right now, where it could be very volatile. Chiefs Bills in Week 11, not much needs to be said there. That's been a classic matchup in the past 4 or 5 years. I highlighted Colts Jets. One, are we going to have Anthony Richardson for a full season? Is he going to miss games? Is he going to learn how to protect himself? Avoid unnecessary hits, slide when necessary. Is he going to develop more as a passer? Because we haven't seen any sign of that being a thing. And is he going to be on the field during this game? Because if he is, I think that'll be a good game. The Colts have an underrated defense as well. First-round talent across the board on the defensive line. Got Michael Pittman. I won't say one of the best receivers in the game, but a very, very good starter. Quality starting receiver. A lot of wide receiver help. Jonathan Taylor's going to be healthy. So the team is there. That was a borderline playoff team last season with Gardner Minshew. Is Anthony Richardson going to be able to push them over the top and make them competitive in the division and in the AFC as a whole? So I think that would be a good showcase game for that, even though it's not a night game. It's one I'm going to have my eyes on. Week 12, I said Cowboys, Commanders. All of the Commanders games are going to be contingent upon Jaden Daniels' performance throughout the year. But I think that, like I mentioned, the NFC East earlier, he also could determine. He really is kind of the fulcrum of whether the NFC East is going to be a competitive division or not. If the Commanders are competitive, then there are 3 teams there at least. Daniel Jones, I don't quite believe is going to be top 10 at quarterback, but I think he's a good enough quarterback to help that team win, which was evidenced when they went to the playoffs with Saquon. Devin Singletary obviously isn't Saquon, but he's a quality enough running back where if you give him the touches and the carries, he can produce for you in the ways that we saw last season with Houston. So if they can replicate that same formula they had with Saquon, obviously you won't get the same production, but good enough production where Daniel Jones will be more supported, and now you have number one receiver in Malik Neighbors that Daniel Jones really hasn't had his whole career to trust. So Giants very well could be competitive. I have them probably third or fourth in the division. Commanders could be third or fourth or second, depending on how Jaden does. And in the years to come, if development goes accordingly, the East could be back to being the East of old, where it could go either way. 49ers, Packers in Week 12. I think that'll be a good playoff rematch between those two teams. Eagles, Rams is another good one. Stafford usually makes his late playoff pushes and playoff runs with the Rams since he's been there, and that'll be around that same time where it's going to be, okay, we pushing for wild card, division championship, number one seed. What are we doing? It'll be around that week. It also be the same time period of whether the Eagles start to collapse or whether they solidify themselves at the top of their division and the top of the conference. The Harbaugh Bowl is that week as well, but I'm not too invested in that. I mean, both great coaches, undisputed, but I don't see the Chargers really, and maybe it's my division hate. I don't know. I'm not sure about Justin Herbert. And I think Jim Harbaugh is unsure about Justin Herbert as well, which is why he didn't build the receiving talent up as much as he did the run game. Obviously, that's his calling card, is running the football. Never really had big name talent at receiver in any of his locales. However, when you have a quarterback that's top 5 talent in the NFL and has been productive in the NFL, to not support him in that way, it kind of suggests that you got him on a trial run and you're not too sold on him, or the belief isn't that strong in him, and you're just going to kind of see what he does, and if you need to move him at the end of the season and go a different route with what your dynamic has historically been. I'm not sure how the Chargers are going to look this year, if they're going to be truly competitive. Obviously, they're in the right division to do it objectively because the Raiders aren't that big of a threat to the Chargers. That's a 50-50 matchup with us not having even our starting quarterback selected yet. And then the Broncos are the Broncos. I really don't have much faith in them at all. But that's why that game, I don't know if it'll be as good. The Ravens might beat them handily by 14 to 17 points, like 2.5 scores, 3 scores. I don't know. But I will be interested to see how the Chargers look by Week 12 for sure. Raiders-Chiefs play on Black Friday again. I'm gonna leave that one alone. I was just very great. I had a good Christmas last year. I'll just say that. And I hope I have another good Christmas this year. I hope that it's a meaningful game this time and that it's not just for pride, but for a playoff spot or playoff seeding or a division championship. I hope it's a more meaningful game for sure. Texans-Jags, Week 13. I mentioned that one as far as an interdivision matchup to watch. Eagles-Ravens. I made this note. I said I hope this is one of the most I think this will be the most interesting or competitive matchups of the year. If the Eagles can sustain what they started from last year, from Week 1 to about Week 10, if they can replicate that start this season and sustain it into the back half of the season, and the Ravens can do the same, that'll be probably one of the best matchups of the whole season between the Eagles and the Ravens. Because you've got talent all over the place. Eagles got Saquon Barkley. Ravens got Derrick Henry. Eagles already have one of the best receiving cores in the league. Ravens don't have much to say at receiver, but Lamar accounts for that with what he can do outside of the pocket. One of the best defenses in the NFL historically with the Ravens. A much improved defense, particularly in the secondary, with the Philadelphia Eagles. I just think that takes me back to like 05, 06, where there's Ray Lewis on one side and Brian Dawkins on the other side. You got Donovan McNabb over here, and you got was Joe in the league by then? I forget who the quarterback was for the Ravens. But it was a very similar dynamic, and that was when Ray was on the cover of Madden, and they had all the new features of like night matchups and the clouds and the smoke, and like I just really think that could be a really quality matchup. Hopefully, I don't know if they're flexing at that point on Sunday Night Football, but I would love to see that game flexed on a Sunday night if they are by that time. It might be late, like a couple weeks later, but I digress. Week 14, Falcons-Vikings. Is Kirk Cousins still the starter for the Atlanta Falcons by week 14? That's the question I have there. Is Sam Darnold still the starter for the Minnesota Vikings? I'm sure they would want Kirk to be the starter to be able to try to get revenge against his most recent former franchise, because he did used to play for the Commanders as well, the Redskins at the time. But are the Falcons competitive enough? Is it meaningful enough to them for him to be the starter in week 14? Or are they like, yeah, we're going to test run that guy that we just drafted in the first round this year by week 14? I believe Kirk is going to have a great season. I believe he's going to acclimate well to the new environment. He's got the right running back to help him be the quarterback he's always been and probably be better. And Bijan Robinson, he loves working off of play action. He loves working in the pocket. He has Drake London on the outside. He has Kyle Pitts at tight end. He has the appropriate talent to where I don't think that'll really be a question week 14, but it's something to consider. Coming off an Achilles tear, being older, people having question marks. They literally draft a quarterback in the first round before you even get your feet wet. It's worth considering. I have confidence in Kirk, but it's worth considering. And then, obviously, as I mentioned, J.J. McCarthy backing up Sam Darnold. All reports thus far have been not very favorable for J.J. McCarthy to be starting by that time of year. I mean, obviously, knock on wood, barring injury for Sam Darnold, I have similar confidence in him as I have in Kirk to sustain the starting job throughout the course of the season. And I think that could be a sneaky good matchup for those reasons. Bills-Rams, I highlighted that one. I think both of them are going to be making playoff pushes at that point. I have confidence in the 49ers locking up the NFC West, so the Rams will be fighting for a wild card. The AFC East, the Dolphins are no slouch, but I've got a funny feeling about the Jets. And I think the Jets will make life more difficult for the Bills to where at this point in the season, the Bills are going to have to play high-level competitive ball for more than just comfort and seeding, but a playoff spot. So I think both of these teams at this point are going to be fighting for playoff spots, which will make it that much more intense of a matchup. The Rams play the 49ers week 15? Not 17. That might be their second matchup. But they obviously play twice a year in the division. Week 15 will be a Thursday night game. And I anticipate more of a dogfight in the West at this point for all the reasons I've mentioned. And if you know me, you know I don't like talking about the Rams this much. Again, I'm going to touch on that in the next episode. But being objective, I think they're going to have a really good season. And they're going to give the 49ers hell. By this time of the season, again, all of this is projecting healthy players and healthy key players. 49ers are going to have it easy. I still think the 49ers win the division, but it's not going to be simple. It's not going to be an easy matter at all. And I haven't even mentioned the Seahawks at all, which I think they've gotten much better. And now they have a defensive-minded head coach. Not that they didn't, Pete Carroll, but they're sustaining the legacy of what they've built in Seattle by bolstering that secondary, getting more support for Geno on offense, getting their running backs healthy. So that division is not a cake. I'm not giving it to the 49ers like it's just going to be nothing. But ultimately, I do think the 49ers will figure it out. Now, if Ayuk, for whatever reason, and I don't anticipate this happening, but if Ayuk is missing, if any of those pieces are missing, we see how that goes. If you've watched the receiver series on Netflix, we see how it was when Debo missed time, and we've seen how it is when any of those pieces on the offense miss time. So not just Ayuk, but with him having the contract disputes, that's what made me throw that out there. So tantalizing Week 15 matchup. I also highlighted Packers-Seahawks, which that was ironic because I just mentioned the Seahawks. That's on Sunday night for Week 15. I said it's one of my favorite aesthetics in the NFL is a night game in Seattle. I just think they got the right stadium, the right colors, uniforms, the crowd noise, everything it's one of the better looking aspects of NFL football is night games in Seattle. And I think it's going to be an opportunity for Jordan Love to make a statement. Like, I got this contract for a reason. I don't think the Seattle Seahawks play bad. I just think the Packers play better. And I think it'll be a sense of atonement for that the playoff game that it's an opportunity for atonement for the playoff game that the Seahawks lost to the Packers when Matt Hasselbeck predicted that touchdown or predicted that score in overtime, and then he got pick sixed on the first drive. So I don't know. I'm rambling, but yeah, I like that. I like that matchup. Let's see. Week 16, Texans versus Chiefs. That's going to be a Saturday game. Week 16. I think that'll be a really good matchup. Steelers Ravens. That's going to be what it is every year. Rams versus Jets. Two of the older quarterbacks in the NFL. Battle of the OGs. So how competitive are they in their divisions, in their conferences? Are they title contenders at that point in the season? How beat up are the quarterbacks at that point in the season? You know, how much punishment have they taken? I think those will be a good one. Those will be good matchups. And then Week 17, you got the Ravens versus the Texans. That's on Christmas. You got Jets Bills, which I mentioned earlier. You got Lions versus the 49ers, which that'll be a revenge game from last year in the playoffs. All good matchups. Week 18 is all divisional matchups, so if I haven't mentioned them already, division matchups are already naturally interesting because of the rivalries that have been built. But that's what I've got for this coming year. I'm not ready to do my predictions just yet. I like to wait until training camp is close to over or all the way over because of injuries and unexpected moves and all of that good stuff. I'm going to give the preseason a chance to play out before I make any predictions, but I've got a couple of inklings of how I think things will go. A couple of teams that I think will be surprises. I've already mentioned a few. And I'm excited. This is, what do they call it? The NFL Network. We're back Saturday. What is it called? I've got it up over here. Back Together Weekend. Sheesh. We're back together. We're talking football. We're having fun. We're getting our unreasonable expectations for our different teams. And I'm excited to talk about it. So I'll be back next week. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about my fanhood journey, since we'll not yet have games. Obviously, I'll provide some updates from the week of training camp, and we'll just take it the rest of the way, all the way through the season. I'm hopefully be able to break down some film as I get access to it and talk more about what I see from the players on the field and the coaches as they navigate the X's and O's of the actual game of football. But I appreciate you all. If you've listened this long, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, like it, comment on it, subscribe, share it. Feel free to shoot me an email at 2deepcoverage@gmail.com. That's 2, the number 2, deepcoverage@gmail.com if you have any suggestions or questions or anything you want to see, anything you think I should tweak or add to the podcast and make it better. I'm going to keep trying to make it better and better and better and better week after week, all the way through the season. So until next time, peace.